If you have watched any of my videos, whenever I talk about Gemini energy, there is one word in particular I always use, and that is mixy. Gemini energy is very busy bee, busy body, all over the place, talking to people, chatting it up, learning things, curious. If there's one thing you can say about Gemini energy, it definitely doesn't stand still. It's always moving. However, of course, there's so much more. And especially as a Gemini rising, there may be some characteristics that surprise you. Because although Gemini is moving all over the place and the social butterfly of the zodiac, at times Gemini can be extremely reclusive. Not only that, in a certain area of Gemini rising's life, they are very adventurous, very risk-taking, if I may say so. And then finally, the thing that I find the most surprising about Gemini rising is that when it comes to another certain area of life, you guys are selfless, altruistic, and extremely, extremely sensitive. There's so much more than meets the eye. So in this video, I will be discussing everything you need to know about Gemini rising in the natal chart. All right, so stick around. You definitely don't want to miss this. Hello, my loves. As always, I hope that this video finds you well and in excellent spirits. If this is our first time meeting, welcome. My name is Mel. I'm a professional astrologer and I'm the founder of Divine Feminine Works, where I help people unlock their divinity and discover their magic. And as always, if you are returning, welcome back. So today's video is all about Gemini rising, and we are keeping this rising sign series going with this next video. So I've already created a playlist. Definitely check it out if you haven't already, so you can learn more about your rising sign, or maybe you're cross-watching for someone else and you want to know more about them. So generally speaking, when it comes to rising signs, it is the objective view of your personality. So your rising sign makes up the big three in astrology, namely your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising sign, right? So your sun sign has everything to do with your outward expression, how you express yourself in the world, and how you view yourself is determined by the characteristics of your sun sign. Whereas your moon sign is also subjective because it has a lot to do with your inner world, your subconscious, and your emotions. So when you examine your sun and your moon signs, it's really about how you describe yourself. However, your rising sign differs because it is how the world perceives you, hence why it is a little more objective. It's like the billboard that you carry. It's your personal sign that tells the world who you are. Now, keep in mind, a lot of times the characteristics of your rising sign may differ from your sun sign and or your moon sign. However, when you put these three signs together, they kind of give you a comprehensive view of who you are in a nutshell. And if you want to know more about the big three in astrology, I created a video about it. If you want to check it out, it's right here and the link will be in the description box below. All right, so this video is about Gemini rising, the mixy social butterfly of the zodiac. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so you know the deal. We always start with the basics. And I just want to talk a little bit about rising signs generally. So of course, rising signs, like I said before, it's part of the big three: your sun, your moon, and your rising sign. Now, most people are familiar with your sun sign, which all depends on the day that you were born, right? If you were born on, let's say, September 1st, you would be a Virgo. If you were born on December 1st, you would be a Sagittarius, right? That determines your sun sign. The day that you were born also will determine your moon sign. Now, depending on the time of day will determine your moon sign, but generally speaking, the moon spends about 2 to 3 days in a sign. So depending on the day you were born, you could figure out what your moon sign is. However, the rising sign changes every 2 hours. And this is why it is so important to have your precise birth time, because the difference between being born at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. could mean 2 or even 3 different rising signs. So again, that's why it's super important to know your precise birth time. And the rising sign essentially is the sign that was on the eastern horizon at the moment that you were born. Think of it as your personal sunrise. It signifies your incarnation into this lifetime, okay? So it is basically your breaking through point, right? Especially when we're talking about birth, like your literal breaking through point, right? But that is your rising sign. And I also want to make it an important distinction between your rising sign and your ascendant, because you'll hear people use these terms interchangeably. So your rising sign is a sign that was rising at the time of your birth. It's the sign that was on the eastern horizon at the moment that you were born. However, each zodiacal sign in the astrological wheel has 30 degrees. And so the exact degree of your rising, right, your exact sunrise is known as your ascendant. So for instance, let's say you're a Taurus rising. That means that at the moment that you were born, the sign on the eastern horizon was Taurus, somewhere between those 30 degrees. However, your ascendant will be the specific degree within those 30 degrees. So let's say you are a 12-degree Taurus ascendant. 12 degrees of Taurus is your ascendant and Taurus is your rising sign. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. And that's an important distinction, even though you hear people use those terms interchangeably. So again, to reiterate, when we're talking about rising signs generally, it's the billboard that you wear. It's the mask that you wear, and it's how the world perceives you. And this is an important part of your personality because, again, it's objective. Sun and moon are very subjective. Your rising sign is objective. All right. And so that way it kind of gives you that part of your personality that maybe you embody, but you don't recognize. That's why sometimes a lot of people have, I don't want to say issues, but a lot of people don't necessarily always connect with their rising sign because it could be drastically different from their sun sign or maybe even their moon sign, but it is important nonetheless. All right. So without further ado, let's get into the topic of today's video, which is Gemini rising. All right. So first up, let's talk about Gemini characteristics generally. So Gemini is a very kind of youthful and fun energy in terms of the zodiac, right? Gemini is the busy bee. It's mixy. It's communicative. It's all over the place. So Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is the planet of communication and ideas. So Gemini generally is very cerebral, very mental, and very logical. However, when we look at the mythology of Gemini and the planet Mercury, we come to the mythological figure of Hermes. All right. Hermes was the messenger of the gods. Whenever the gods needed to speak to each other, they used Mercury as the go-between. Hence why Mercury is associated with speed and with communication. And this is very much a part of the Gemini energy signature. Geminis are communicative. They're chatty. I mean, think about any Geminis in your life that you know, whether it's a Gemini sun, rising, or moon. They tend to be pretty chatty. They're very intellectual. Gemini is also very curious. So of course, all of these characteristics would apply to a Gemini rising. All right. Gemini can also be very intellectual, can be very extroverted. Now, interestingly enough, every zodiac sign is given a form of expression. And the two forms of expression are masculine and feminine. So feminine zodiac signs are introverted and they're very emotional, whereas masculine zodiac signs are extroverted and they're very expressive, right? Gemini is the only sign of the zodiac that is known as neutral. Gemini is neither masculine nor feminine. It's androgynous, if you will. And it's not to say that anyone that has Gemini placements is androgynous. It's just that the energy is fluid. And this very much goes back to the point I was making before about how Gemini has this energy of speed and of communication and fluidity. So again, it's not to say that if you have Gemini placements, that that's how you are, but you are adaptable. Okay. Gemini is also a mutable sign, which further sort of enhances that fluidity and that adaptability. Again, if you think about any of the Geminis in your life, they can likely strike up a conversation with anybody. They can talk to anybody and they can almost kind of relate to anybody as well. They are sponges when it comes to knowledge, and when it comes to indulging in curiosity, nobody does it better than Gemini, right? Now, when we're talking about Gemini rising specifically, some of these characteristics of Gemini rising may be a bit surprising because whenever you hear Gemini, you think social butterfly, you think chatty, communicative, right? However, when it comes to family and home, Gemini can be extremely reclusive. So while Gemini can be the life of the party, at times you will definitely find Gemini at home, especially when it comes to family. They can definitely hunker down and really focus on family. I'll dare say that a lot of times Gemini risings are the glue that holds their family together. Because their fourth house is Virgo, and Virgo sort of makes order out of chaos, Virgo energy in the fourth house definitely denotes the type of personality that organizes things at home, that may be the leader, that may be the person that gets everyone together and gets everybody in line, right? Next, let's talk about relationships. I'm going to go into this a little further later in the video. However, suffice it to say, Gemini rising, your seventh house of relationships is Sagittarius. So when it comes to your committed relationships, your marriages and your business partnerships, you're definitely adventurous. You definitely like to experience people who are different than you. Think of it this way. Gemini represents the twins, right? That's sort of the symbology of Gemini energy. Twins are the same. Even if they're fraternal, they come from the same source, right? So Gemini is very comfortable with people that are homogenous or the same. However, the opposite of Gemini is Sagittarius. And that's where, as a Gemini rising, your seventh house would be. So when it comes to people that you want to marry, when it comes to people that you want to lock yourself down with, you like people who are different, people who are nothing like you, people who may come from different cultures, different backgrounds. You tend to be very adventurous when it comes to relationships. And then when it comes to career, you guys are surprisingly altruistic and very service-oriented, as you have Pisces as your 10th house of career. So you guys could probably be involved in charity work. Maybe you work for a nonprofit. Regardless of what you do for work or your career, you are selfless and you like to give of yourself. And this bodes very well with the Gemini energy because Gemini loves to talk to people and relate to people. And so as a career, it's like you take that communicative style, you take that ability to relate to people and you use it in a selfless sort of way. Very, very, very interesting. All right. So now that we've talked about, actually, there's one other thing I wanted to talk about, and I didn't necessarily talk about it too much in the past videos that I did, but going forward, this is something that I'm going to begin to enumerate for each rising sign. Every rising sign has a particular physical attribute. So every zodiac sign is associated with a part of the body. And so when we're talking about rising signs, people with the same rising signs tend to have similar physical attributes. In the last video I did about Taurus rising, I talked about how they kind of have thick ankles. Because think about a bull, right? They have to have thick ankles to, support that big, stocky body. So when we're talking about the physical attributes of Gemini rising, you tend to be quite muscular, quite lean, and sort of have delicate features, okay? And this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about Gemini being neutral and somewhat androgynous. It's not to say that you look androgynous, but you have very delicate features, which are very beautiful, actually. But the one thing I will say that I have noticed about Gemini risings that I absolutely love, or even Gemini suns, you guys have great hands. Your hands are typically very nice looking. A lot of you tend to work with your hands, but your hands may be the part of your body that stands out and that people may actually notice because Gemini rules the hands, okay? And you also may be muscular. You may be kind of on the thinner side, or at least you have a very slender kind of body, if I may say so, right? But I will say that the thing that stands out the most about Gemini are your hands. Gemini rising, I should say. Okay, so now that we've talked about the main characteristics, let's get into some specific areas of life and see what makes you tick. So typically people want to know the most about three things: relationships, money, and career. So first, let's talk about relationships. So relationships run the gamut, right? You could have family relationships, friendships, lovers, kids. But for the sake of this video, we're going to talk about the ones that people want to know about the most: romantic relationships and friendships. So in the natal chart, you will look to your 5th house for romantic partners, your 7th house for committed partnerships and marriages, and your 11th house for friendships. So when it comes to Gemini rising, your 5th house is going to be Libra. So when it comes to romantic partners, you guys tend to be relationship-oriented people. You tend to be very reciprocal. You give what you get and you match people's energy. I love that Libra is your 5th house because it bodes well with Gemini energy because both Gemini and Libra are air signs. So when it comes to romantic partnerships, you are very communicative. You're likely to strike up a conversation with someone. You're likely to be the starter when it comes to romantic relationships. Okay. Now let's take it a step further and talk about your committed partnerships and your marriages. This is your 7th house, which is Sagittarius. And I alluded to this before. When it comes to these kind of relationships, you guys love adventure. You love to experience new things and new people who are perhaps are very different from you. Even when it comes to marriage, you guys may have a very idyllic and sort of fantastical view of what your relationship should be like. It's like you have this ideal in your head and that's sort of what you stick to. But you're willing to experience a lot of different people and different experiences when it comes to finding a committed partner. And then finally, when it comes to friendships, you guys have Aries as your 11th house. So this means that you guys are bold, dynamic. You probably have a lot of friends who are I want to say short term, but I don't mean it like that. Like that's a bad thing. You probably meet people, you're friends with them for a little while, and then maybe they kind of drop off, right? Aries energy loves the thrill of the chase, but not necessarily longevity. So you guys probably have no problem making friends, but maybe keeping friends may not be your strong suit. And again, I mean no shade by that, right? But also, you're willing to take a risk when it comes to your friends. So you may, again, be friends with people who may be very different than you, people who are exciting, people who are risk takers, but again, not necessarily people who will stay in your life for a long time. All right. Now let's talk about money. And when we talk about money in the natal chart, we look at 2 different houses, your 2nd house of personal finances and your 8th house of shared finances and debt. So for you, Gemini, your 2nd house is Cancer. So when it comes to your personal finances, you may be the type of people that nurture your personal finances, meaning that you're very much concerned with saving, perhaps. You are great at saving for a rainy day. You may have a goal, right, that you are saving towards. So suffice it to say, I think that you guys are great at saving. However, you can be very temperamental when it comes to your personal finances. Cancer is a sign that's known to be very moody. So perhaps a lot of your financial situations they really hinge on how you feel about them. So they may waver back and forth depending on your emotions. All right. And then we look at your 8th house, which has to do with your shared resources and your debt. And for you, your 8th house is Capricorn. So you guys tend to be very practical when it comes to debt. I get the sense that maybe you don't take on debt very easily or you only do so when it is necessary. When it comes to shared resources, like perhaps the bank account that you share with your spouse, or maybe when it comes to your mortgage and things like that, you probably tend to be very practical, conservative, and you think of the bigger picture. So when you're making decisions based on debt or even shared finances, you look at the end goal rather than get swept up in instant gratification. So suffice it to say, I think you guys are very mature when it comes to shared resources and debt. And finally, we are going to talk about work and career. So your 6th house covers work, like your 9-to-5 job, and your 10th house covers your career, so your overall vocation or your life purpose. So for you, Gemini rising, your 6th house is Scorpio. So some of you may be there's so much more than meets the eye when it comes to what you do on a daily basis. Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with the show Martin, right? But you know the character Tommy, and nobody really knew what he did for work. I feel like that's how you guys are too. There's a lot of mystery surrounding what you do on a daily basis. Or perhaps what you do is so involved that people don't necessarily understand it, okay? And I feel like I can attest to this because I know quite a few Gemini risings, and it's like, you can't really put your finger on what they do on a daily basis, but you know that they work. You just don't necessarily understand what they do. Now, Scorpio has a lot to do with deep intensity, emotions, things that are undercover. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of you are involved in like the CIA, or maybe there's a part of your job where you can't tell people exactly what you do because it's so secretive. That may be on the extreme end. However, I think you get what I'm trying to say. There's a bit of mystery when it comes to what you do on a daily basis. However, when it comes to your overarching career, right? Your 10th house of career and public life is Pisces. So you can be very selfless, altruistic, and service-oriented. You think about humanity on a grand scale and you are in service to humanity. So maybe what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is a little secretive, but it's in a way helping humanity as a whole, right? Again, when it comes to career, you guys are service-oriented, selfless. Perhaps you work for a nonprofit. Maybe you work for a charity organization. Whatever you do, it is in service to humanity. Okay? Interesting characteristics nonetheless. So there's so much more than just our outward personalities, right? There's that part of us that's really private, that's really secret, that maybe the world never really gets to see. And so the part of your personality that tends to be hidden is represented by your 12th house of solitude. This is the very essence of you. So I mentioned before that Gemini Rising is very mixy, all over the place and communicative, right? You guys tend to be movers and shakers and are very adaptable and fluid. However, on the inside, you guys are very steadfast, conservative, and perhaps even a little narrow-minded because your 12th house is Taurus. Taurus is a fixed earth sign. You know, a bull, right? A bull is known to be stubborn. And that's how you guys kind of are on the inside. When you have a particular mindset, when you have a particular opinion about something, you guys will probably be very steadfast in that. However, this is not how you present yourself to the world. To the world, you're open to learning new things and talking to different people and just being out there. However, on the inside, you have a very strict moral compass that you definitely stick to. Now, Gemini is very communicative, like I said, all over the place and social, whereas Taurus loves its comforts. It loves to hunker down and feel good. And so when we're talking about that part of your personality that's hidden, on the outside, you guys may be all over the place, but really at your essence, at your core, you long to be comfortable and stable, right? And that's sort of a great juxtaposition because outward facing, again, you guys are all over the place, right? And you tend to be think of it as like a bee going from flower to flower to flower. That's definitely the energy signature of Gemini. However, on the inside, stability is your thing. So while you are all over the place, you probably have a very centered and grounded inner being that's very specific on what it wants, what it doesn't want, what it tolerates, and what it won't tolerate. All right. So that Gemini-Taurus juxtaposition is really important because while people see you as someone who's outgoing and mixy and all over the place, on the inside, you're very grounded and centered. All right. Definitely an interesting characteristic. All right, my love. So that concludes this video on Gemini Rising. So tune in next week while I will be continuing this weekly series and bringing you the video on Cancer Rising. All right. So for information on all my products and services, it's either tagged to the video or in the description box below. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.